Bad trips. They're certainly easier to do in a movie than good trips. I didn't see Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, but everyone said it proves again that it's very easy to portray a bad trip and very hard to portray a good trip. Well, first of all, I'll say all the conventional things about bad trips. That, it's not always supposed to be easy, that sometimes learning curves feel very unpleasant when they're unfolding, and we learn from our mistakes and so forth and so on. So then, having said all that, really, what about bad trips? Well, they're horrible. Bad trips make bad sex look like no problem, which is an amazing thing to achieve. I don't know. I guess part of the fun or part of the challenge of being psychedelic people is that our method, which is drop and wait, you never know. You may think you know, and you may do your Rolfing and your go to Gestalt and just be scrubbed and drained and shined with all your enzyme systems up and going, and it can still just chew your ass unmercifully. It's one of those places where I, who am not necessarily that eager for astrological explanations, reach eagerly for astrological explanations, because if everything else is right, and I've even noticed, Moon in Scorpio for me is not a good time to do psychedelics. I also, before a large trip, I will throw the I Ching. And without spending too much time on the I Ching, I can't remember which hexagram it is, but one of the 64 hexagrams says, inquire again of the oracle if you have constancy, something else. And almost invariably, I have no idea how many times in my life contemplating psychedelic trips I've thrown that hexagram, the hexagram which says ask again. And so then I ask again, and if it's negative, I don't do it. I figure, you have right brain tools and left brain tools. Somehow this question about bad trips is about your pre-trip intuition, feeling into the situation. And then, of course, there are obvious rules. There are guaranteed situations which give you bad trips. Taking too much of a drug with people you don't know, taking large amounts of a drug and mixing it with a lot of moving around in crowded social spaces. Synergies are simply combinations of drugs. If somebody tells you they took ecstasy and then they snorted some ketamine and then they had a little nitrous oxide and some GHB, this is, God knows, literally only God knows, because no clinical medical research is ever done on stuff like that. On the way people in the street actually take drugs is never studied by medical science. And synergies are where the strange things, the dangerous stuff happens, the heart fibrillations, the convulsions, the convulsive vomiting, the states of disorientation, prolonged states of sleeplessness, all of these things. So, my attitude toward avoiding bad trips is, for social purposes, raves and beach parties and whatever, low doses. It's almost a truism, or it is a truism, that if you want to come down from a drug, whether a psychedelic drug or any other drug, the very best thing to do is furious exercise. You know, the guy who throws himself in the icy lake and swims across it, the guy who chops 2 cords of wood to come off some bender. Well, then a dance club is almost like the perfect social situation designed to shorten a drug trip and dampen the effects. But people are such social creatures. You know, I've said in many, many times over the years, to the point where it's almost the McKenna method, although how you could think something so simple-minded was a method, was like the way to take psilocybin, for example, is take a stiff hit, like 5 grams if you're a 145-pound person, on an empty stomach, and lie still in silent darkness. Well, this is almost the opposite of, you know, and the idea is you want to concentrate on the thing itself, which is the drug projected against the black screen of your mind. You don't need doof coming in. You don't need smart drugs. All of these things are actually distractions. And I think people are so reluctant to follow this advice because they actually have no faith in the drug. They think they will be bored. They think, well, if I did that, nothing would happen. Well, I'm telling you, it's for ordinary people. Isn't that what we said? This stuff is not for the swamis. They have their own methods. This is for the great unwashed masses of spiritually seeking humanity. So lay down in silent darkness and take a look. And then if the trip is really bad, then there are things you can do while it's happening that are helpful. The most obvious one is, or the most effective, I don't know if it's the most obvious, but I really believe it's the most effective, is if you get into a place that you don't like, and it's not physiological, it's not that you're having convulsions or vomiting, it's just that you're having thoughts which alarm you, you should sing. You can make whatever shamanic hash of this you wish, but the basic concept is to oxygenate your brain. There's something about bad states of mind on psychedelics are very frequently, in my observation, accompanied by shallow breathing. People get, when you thread a needle, everybody holds their breath. Nobody can thread a needle without holding their breath. It's like keeping your eyes open while you sneeze. A human being cannot do this. So when we are really following our thought at the level of threading a needle, we stop breathing. And if you're not paying attention, this can go on for minutes, this very shallow breathing. You're not breathing, dude. So... And so what the thing to do is to sit up and, your favorite shamanic chant, Fleetwood Mac recitation or whatever, just belt it out. It doesn't really matter. I mean, it may matter. I mean, if you choose certain mantras or something, haystacks will burst into flame. But, and there's no obligation to be au courant or hip either. It doesn't have to be Aphex Twins. It can be row, row, row your boat. I've always preferred, because it does contain the refrain, merrily, 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 life is but a dream. If you're loaded on psilocybin or ayahuasca, the thought that life is but a dream opens ahead of you and becomes epiphanous instead of ridiculous. But nobody does this a lot who doesn't then occasionally put in a very difficult evening. And, part of your psychic, I guess your shamanic constitution is how quickly can you come back from a really bone-shaking psychedelic experience, either because it blew your mind in some way or something appalling happened. I remember a number of psychedelic trips that were hard to come back from, but I remember one in particular years ago where my friend and I took a lot of acid, and late in the trip, like about 3:30 in the morning, he had a very dramatic epileptic seizure, and I had never seen an epileptic seizure, and oh God, it just set off this cascade of hysterical activity. The 911 people had to be called. I remember there was a real moment of truth in all this for me. I remember the apartment was on the second floor, and I saw the cop cars and everything pull up in front. We had flushed staggering amounts of dope, knowing that they were about to arrive. And I went tearing down to the front door, and I was completely loaded on acid. I mean, I could barely stand, and I could see through the glass the cop. And he said, "Open the door." We had locked the door earlier in the evening. He said, "Open the door." So I fumbled with the door for a few seconds, completely hysterically and ineffectively, and then I couldn't get the door open. So I stepped back from the door and said, "Shoot the lock off." And then I realized, dude, get a grip. You're going to have to, this is headed in the wrong direction. And the cop was like, so then, and then I remember, this trip to the hospital, and I don't know what was going on. It was Herrick Hospital. It was in Berkeley, which was also a mental hospital. This bed, me standing at the end of the bed, trying to figure out, is he dead? Is he alive? What does this mean? Who am I? What's going on? And then there was a person who was obviously an inmate of the stranger wards of this mental hospital, who was washing the floor with this big mop and sort of waltzing around us with this crazy expression and leaning over and looking at me and looking at him. And I just didn't know whether, is this really happening? And if it is happening, why is it happening? And if it isn't happening, why do I think this is what's happening? And then finally the doctors threw me out of there, and I just walked the streets of Berkeley for hours, and my mind was like spinning, just saying, something terrible has happened. Something terrible, terrible, terrible has happened. And it took days to realize, yes, he had an epileptic fit. Here's what an epileptic seizure is. Here's the drug. Here's the prognosis. Here he is, seemingly all right. He came through it in much better shape, it seemed, than I did. I mean, I was deeply spun by all of this crazy shit. And that's not an out-of-control drug story. I mean, truly, I'm a very conservative person, so for me, that was an evening really getting beyond management. But some people, start out like that. I had friends in the 60s in New York City who would say, in Manhattan, they would say, let's take 500 mics and hit the streets and mess with people's minds. Well, and you quickly discover there are people out there capable of messing with your mind, and more than your mind, but sitting up all night in Manhattan diners just taking on all comers for mind games is, no way to spend an evening. Anyway, so much for the question, what do you do about bad trips? If you have character, you live through them, and after a few months go back to it. Many people, it's a bad trip that finishes them for psychedelics, and I don't think, you're ever really immune to it. the funny thing about psychedelics, I think, especially psilocybin, I've noticed, is it's incredibly gentle with beginners. It almost never bites a beginner, these clueless people who go to it with knees knocking. Usually, the doors of heaven open and they're sweating. It's the veterans, it's the old battle-scarred explorers who, come back from a certain given evening with their eyes bugging and a tale to tell.